Before watching this, I only need 5 subs to reach 1000 subscribers, so please help me achieve it now. Let's start the video. Issei screamed in terror as a lance made of fire pierced his chest, his heart, and burned its way through his back. The raiding game between Rias Gremry and Riser Phoenix had been a disaster from the start. The downfall had all begun during Riser's visit to a cult research club, which Riser had arranged in order to learn more about what his future wife was doing, but what had been in actuality a thinly veiled attempt at goading Rias into attacking Riser and thus giving the latter a chance to make demands of Gremry family. The man's strategy had failed at the start as Rias had kept her cool for the whole duration of the meeting, at least until Rias's pawn, Issei, had overheard of the meet from Rias's queen, Akino, and the boy had decided to intervene for the sake of his big-breasted red-headed potential harem member, who also happened to be Issei's king. While Issei was a mere pawn in the chessboard allegory that was peerage system among the race of devils. Nonetheless, the meeting between Riser Phoenix and Rias Gremry had gone downhill from there at the same speed and direction as a loaded gasoline truck driving off a bridge to a lake of lava, and the speed had only gone up when Issei had involved himself in it. In the end, Issei had walked away with a red face, largely due to the thinly disguised screaming match he had with Riser. Riser had walked away with a slap on his cheek, courtesy of Rias, while the rest of Rias's and Riser's peerages had walked from the visit without a single scratch. Issei, being out of breath and utterly outraged for Rias's sake, didn't count as battle damage, so he was denied his requested prize of being allowed to pat Rias's head and breasts. It was clear that Issei hadn't understood what had happened, as Issei had thought to Rias that the event had ended in their definite victory. Akino had given him a glare that would have flash-electrocuted a regular human, and Rias had been on the verge of crying for the whole afternoon after Riser left. The next morning, the reason for the despaired mood became clear. It turned out that the disrespect and physical harm directed towards Phoenix family's son during the meeting gave the Phoenix family an excuse to demand amends from the Gremry family. Thus, Phoenix family had requested that the ranking game which Riser had discussed with Rias during their meeting before Issei's interruption, a team deathmatch that would either free Rias from her forced arranged marriage with Riser or force her to marry the man immediately, would no longer take place in 10 days from the meeting like how Riser had planned it to take place. Rather, the raiding game would take place the next day, as the incident of Rias slapping Riser gave the latter an excuse to move the date out of spite. And Rias Gremry's peerage had not been ready for the game. The next day, the peerages had faced off against each other in the raiding game Pocket Dimension inside Underworld, and within minutes of the game's start Rias's peerage had lost its first member. Asia, Rias's bishop, had been completely unprepared for the game, and despite Rias's attempt to shield the girl, the nun-turned-devil had been taken out instantly as Riser's queen, a woman who had unhealthy obsession with explosions, had carpet-bombed the Gremry team's starting area with enough explosives to resemble a full-blown artillery strike. The damage the bombardment inflicted was fairly meager due to its scattered nature, in comparison to most other skills devils could wield, but Asia had no way of mitigating the area of effect damage. And thus, the team's fragile healer had been the first to retire. It was fortunate that the Pocket Dimension had layers upon layers of wards and detection systems that would allow any member of the peerage to retreat willingly or be forced to eject out of the dimension should they take enough damage to qualify as imminently lethal. But being too careless could still prove fatal, as the ward system wasn't foolproof, nor was it truly faultless. Accidental deaths would still happen despite the wards, so most raiding game participants took special care to avoid overly lethal attacks, as accidental killing of opponent's piece could easily lead to a circle of vengeance that, in the end, served only to weaken both parties or perhaps even lead to blood feuds between families should a son or a daughter die in the squabble. Both Phoenix family and Gremry family had clearly intended for the match between Gremry and Phoenix to adhere to the protocol, but it seemed that Riser had other plans in mind. Nearly all attacks directed towards Issei had been either near-lethal or aimed to be permanently crippling, whereas the rest of the Gremry oeurage had been taken out with almost mocking ease, with exception of Akino, who had against all odds managed to almost take out Riser's queen before succumbing to her wounds, and the Phoenix Queen had managed to recover thanks to a vial of Phoenix tears that had rejuvenated her body. Issei had only barely managed to take out Riser's pawn in combat, and even that due to the fact Kaneko, Rias's rook, had been there to distract the pawn. Later, after Kaneko had succumbed to her wounds, Issei had managed to use his newly developed skill, dress break, on Riser's rook, a tall Wanisama-like woman who had clearly won the position by having thighs that could have crushed bowling balls and hips that could probably bear the weight of an entire generation. Not to mention her breasts, which was what concerned Issei the most. The Chinese-looking had taken her temper out on Issei, leading to his left arm breaking in multiple places. However, Issei had been conflicted on the issue as on other hand, his arm broke. But on other hand, the girl had seemingly zero sense of shame and was swinging her massive épée around with her wild kicks while having zero concern for modesty or for the health of her spine. Issei came to the conclusion that his bones were a worthy sacrifice. However, with the majority of Rias's peerage retired and only Issei remaining from the pieces, Riser had sent all of his remaining peerage to surround the two of them, followed by Riser himself coming to challenge Rias and Issei to a 2-on-1 duel in what seemed to be a baffling display of arrogance. The battle had been entirely one-sided, despite being a 2-on-1 fight. It's as Riser said, this group is almost pitifully weak. Yubaluna, Riser Phoenix's queen, thought to herself as she formed a part of the circle surrounding the duel happening between her king and the opposing peerage's king and a pawn. She felt not insignificant amount of annoyance towards the redhead who seemed to be fighting for her life. Why can't she realize that Riser is only doing this for her sake? If she's desperate to jump into bed with some despicable pervert like that pawn just to spite Riser and try to get him to resign from the marriage contract out of disgust, like Riser told us was the likely scenario, then surely she should be able to see that he's just trying to stop her before she gets too desperate and starts doing some really stupid things like attempting suicide. The whole forwarding the rating game was solely to stop her from doing something drastic out of desperation and hurting herself. Although, while I understand that Riser is taunting her just to throw her off balance, I think that it's a bit excessive when she's shown to be so naive she believes everything she hears. It's not like her brother would allow her to experience even half of what Riser is prattling off. Nor would Riser demean himself to actually do the other half. Can't she even recognize that? Yubaluna bit her lip as the red-headed girl kept resisting her master, who only wished the best for the girl, for the sheltered, pampered and clueless princess of Gremry who was acting against her own best interests. Or at least what Yubaluna thought were Rias's best interests, as in retrospect she knew that it was a bit foolish to assume that a human-made devil like herself could understand what was going through House Gremry's daughter's head. Riser, just end this, finish off that flea that took what was yours and defiled Rias, and come back to us. I could bake a pie afterwards. Shualan got hit by that perf skill, so I'm sure she could use some cheering up. The fact the Queen of Phoenix peerage could think of such things during the rating game showed just how little she cared about Gremry peerage, or how much their strength worried her. She glanced at the sight before her, and true to her thoughts. Rias had lasted for a whole 20 seconds in single combat against Riser Phoenix, 15 of which Riser spent parrying her attacks and looking for a chance to counterattack through Rias's volleys of power of destruction that shattered the courtyard of the projection of Kuo Academy, in front of which the two were fighting. However, Rias had eventually stumbled, and Riser had taken the opportunity to spring forward after regenerating his body, and had been spent the next 5 seconds hitting Rias's joints to force her into a kneeling, almost prostrating pose while tearing her clothes into scraps that barely covered the girl's voluptuous body. And then, Riser had turned towards Issei, who was tossed into the ring made of Riser's peerage members, as the boy had been held still by Riser's 2 knights. Issei, no, retire. Rias cried out in pain as she was forced to watch Riser play fight with Issei in front of her, each attack that Issei made being parried and turned back to the boy with a bloody gash delivered with precision of a sadist. Rias's hands refused to move, her joints were dislocated and broken to the point where she could only watch the duel. No, Issei. Akino. Kaneko. Yuto. Asia. Rias had watched as her peerage, her family within her family, had fallen in front of her and in her defense. For her sake, to save her from a loveless marriage. She loved them all for it, even if their attempt had been futile in the end. All Riser had to do was to administer the coup de grace to Rias. And she took solace in knowing that her brother, Surzex Lucifer, would find a way to get all of Rias's peers to worthy kings. Rias held no illusions as to what the cruel phoenix would demand of her, nor what would become her place in the world. It was clear that he would turn her into little more than a baby factory, a role where having a peerage of her own was completely unnecessary unless Riser wanted to add more pieces to his harem by proxy. After all, the whole point of the marriage was to ensure House of Gremory would have heirs, as Rias was the last scion of the house, as her brother had given up his claim to the house due to becoming a Mao. As such, she had no illusions as to what would happen once the marriage was put into writing. She would pass to Phoenix House, and her eventual sons and daughters would be passed to Gremory House. However, watching the duel, Rias realized that Riser never intended Issei to survive the rating game, likely to deliver a message to Rias, to teach her what her place would be. The look on the blonde phoenix's face told her everything. Either he had arranged for an accident to happen, or had a way to bypass the rating game's injury auto-retirement feature. He had clearly not forgotten Issei's insults towards him, nor the look Rias had given Issei, or the slap she had given Riser after Riser had insinuated Issei to be Rias's attempt to insult their arrangement by betting and resurrecting the most worthless human she could find. Riser was not going to just retire Issei. He was going to kill Issei. I won't back down. Boost. Issei screamed back to Rias as the boy's sacred gear, boosted gear, clashed against Riser's lazy flick of a blade, the man holding a sword he had borrowed from his knight. Not now. This is my fault. If I hadn't. I will make it up to you. Boost. Issei, no. Rias felt as her heart fluttered slightly. Maybe it was just the situation, her despair from her future fate, or combination of all, but at the moment Issei looked like a man. I won't let this scum take you. Boost. Issei. Rias's throat caught as she realized her only option was to surrender willingly. So, that was Riser's plan. She now realized that Riser was deliberately trying to make Rias forfeit by her own will, to allow herself to submit to the Phoenix, and was using Issei as a tool for it. Submit, or I will kill this kid, was what Riser's actions spoke. Surrender yourself willingly, to me. Rias's final straw was taken from her hands, her hope that when Riser would have forcibly retired her she could have pushed herself to the attack to force its lethality, an accident to escape her future. She would have rather died than become Riser's sow, but, if I do that, Issei will die. Rias Gremini, Forf dash. A hand was placed on her mouth, followed by a ball gag which turned her attempt to surrender into a gargle. Rias's eyes went wide as she heard Riser's near-maniacal laughter. She turned her eyes away from Riser's still-naked rook who had ball-gagged her, and towards the son of Phoenix. Really? You, esteemed daughter of Gremory House, my wife from tomorrow onwards, would surrender yourself to save this hairless monkey of a pawn? Riser ran his hand through his blonde hair as he let the blade he had been using fall from his other hand. Ahaha, he must have fucked you like the animal he is for you to develop that kind of affection. Or are you perhaps saying I should spare him so he can watch from the bedside as I take you on our wedding night, and every night afterwards? Perhaps I'll arrange my queen to be traded for that girl you called your queen. Akino, wasn't she? She can watch as well, and join me in bed afterwards. Rias's screams were lost in the gag as she realized Riser had deliberately misled her to believe she could forfeit by declaration and save Issei, only to yank the hope away from her before her eyes. Issei, no, you can't. Shut up, Baldy. I will save Rias, boost. Issei shouted at Riser as he leaped into the air while blood splurted from both of his nostrils and ears thanks to the strain of using boost so many times. The boy used a piece of masonry as a springboard of sorts, and materialized his devil wings to further lift himself to the air for a final attack. Ria saw clearly that Issei was fully prepared to use boosted gear, to the point his body would break, if necessary, to beat the phoenix's face in. The man was motionless for a while as he contemplated the insult. And then flicked his hand in the air. Baldy, huh? Ha, lost your focus, eh? Die. Ish. Nuuhu. A screech of half-garbled despair came from the pair's red-headed observer. Issei felt as a spear made of phoenix's flame pierced his chest, his heart, and came out of his back, paradoxically holding him midair, despite being made of concentrated flame. The man holding the spear held the boy with ease, while looking at him like how one looks at a bug squashed underneath their finest shoes. The flame spread like a spider's web inside Issei's body. Ria. But. Blood spurted from Issei's mouth, and Issei's body became limp. Ah, it was fun, a deep, ominous voice echoed in a royal hall. Banners fluttered in non-existent wind as a creature of unlimited power, peerless intellect, unwavering charisma, and aura of unavoidable death leaned back on a royal throne which would have thrown entire pantheons of gods into envy and despair. Or at least that was the air character Momonga created around himself due to the very roleplay-heavy build that he had made. In retrospect, I should have probably gone with a more meta skill set or attempted to focus more on cookie-cutter abilities rather than general and necromancy-related ones. Although, I don't think my wallet could have kept up if I aimed to have my name amongst the top-tier players. He snorted, or at least made the sound of snorting. A massive, nearly 8 feet tall skeleton, or rather, 7 feet with extra feet from the ominous hood covering his shoulders and head, couldn't quite snort due to lacking appropriate fleshy bits, but at least he could make the sound convincingly enough to fool at least himself and the collected NPCs in front of him. Albeit fooling the NPCs probably didn't take much, considering they couldn't move or think by themselves, being NPCs. The NPCs maids, butlers, monsters, guardians, angels and demons who made the guards and sentinels of the Great Tomb of Nazareth, the guild base of player-made Guild Ainz Gown, kneeled as Momonga lowered his hand and he looked up at the ticking counter in his sight. And so, end of the final era cometh. How could he, Suzuki Satoru, a businessman who spent all his money sans essentials to full-body VR game Yggdrasil, not be present when the game finally shuts down? He couldn't. The shutdown would close a page in his life, a page that had taken most of his adult life to write, so at least he wanted to write its last sentences with gold and ruby dust. For that reason, he had the treasury emptied of select world-class items and other items he felt particular affinity to and moved them to his personal inventory. Is this how the pharaohs of old felt when they were buried with their treasures, facing the final journey, surrounded by their loyal servants and treasures amassed in life as the crypt is sealed? Suzuki no, Momonga closed his eyes, the baleful red lights in his empty eye sockets dimming to ember. Ah, Ainz Gown, it was fun, let's meet again in the next game. Before Momonga the clock ticked. 4. 3, 2, 1. Ow. Momonga opened his eyes as something caused pain in his chest. And he saw that he was being held 2 feet in the air, suspended by a flaming spear held by a vicious-looking blonde-haired man, in a battlefield that looked like a yard of a high school that had been shelled by mortars and artillery. Fitting, since said high school was near them, looking equally shelled. Momonga's years of PvP experience kicked in before his rational thoughts did. Time stop. Momonga tried to let out a sigh. It was somewhat difficult, considering the amount of blood flooding his lungs. Then the Overlord-class skeletal magic caster realized that he had been covered in flesh, and felt claustrophobic panic. The feeling was forcibly suppressed, and Suzuki Satoru freaked over how he had seriously contemplated pulling off the skin and flesh that naturally covered his face. That feeling was suppressed as well. A second passed and Suzuki Satoru, now in a state of relative calmness, realized that he had been spearfished out of the sky like if he had been mid-leap, and was skewered with a burning rod. He tried to let out panicked, shrill screams, but failed. The panic seemed to hit a maximum cap after just one attempt at shriek, and the emotion came down like someone had reached into his skull and pushed the feeling back to a dark corner of his mind with a long stick. Pierced both lungs, tore my heart in pieces. Left arm broken. Momonga's rational brain went into overdrive analyzing the situation. Surprising him as the part of him that was Suzuki Satoru was gearing himself to start panicking again, while the part of his mind that was Momonga was resisting the urge to try to burn off the flesh that clung to his skeletal frame. Some sort of emotion suppression? That was part of undead species, ability to ignore emotions and suppress foreign ones. Immunity to charms and resistance to mind control, etc. Probably should focus on the task at hand. Momonga realized his thoughts started to become more and more clipped, skipping words as he went through likely scenarios looking for answer to a very, very burning question. What happened? Suzuki Satoru screamed mentally before building confusion and panic were suppressed once again. I have to improvise now and think more on this later. Time stop, takes too much mana to sustain for long periods. 10 seconds is probably the best I should do if I want to be able to fight properly afterwards, and it has been 3 seconds already. First things first. Momonga looked at the blonde man who had attacked him, cough, ugh, that got enough blood out of my lungs. I have lungs? No, distractions, focus. Delay magic, true death, delay magic, detect life. Damage could not be dealt or recovered while time was stopped, but spells could be cast and with proper delay on activation the spell would cast the moment time resumed its flow. Delay magic, body of effulgent beryl, delay magic, body of effulgent ruby. Momonga listed off more spells. He wasn't sure how strong enemies were in, wherever he was, but with true death, he could somewhat gauge approximate level of an enemy as the spell dealt consistent damage regardless of how well it hit, that being an instant death upon low-level or unprepared targets. Which meant he could gauge the enemy's approximate level based off if they resisted the spell or not, as opposed to something like Fireball, that could deal varying amount of damage based off the exact strike area and the level of the opponent. A headshot would deal more damage than a clip of a wing, for example. The two other spells would buff his two weaknesses, giving him resistance to bludgeoning damage, the Bane of Skeletons, and fire damage, Bane of Undead in general. Considering he was skewered with a spear, or staff, made of fire, the latter seemed very important, and if the spear was indeed staff, the lack of innate bludgeoning damage resistance could become a very serious issue very quickly if he was careless. Momonga took a look around himself to take in the sight of potential new opponents as he finished casting his basic buffs, intending on conserving his mana until he knew more what his enemies could do. His eyes scanned the ring of NPCs surrounding him. And what he saw left him gobsmacked as his eyes were drawn to a woman with a very curvaceous figure and equally ample bosom who was shamelessly flaunting both in a headstrong, wide-legged stance. The effect was further amplified by the woman being completely naked. Are those uncovered breasts? And, shaved? In-game? Now I feel like some sort of teenage pervert. Hold on, is this still Yggdrasil? The server ended, right? This isn't a cow level, although, looking at Miss Flasher there. Ugh, I need to go out more. Suzuki Satoru sighed while mentally rubbing his head. Wait, in Neo Japan Deep Dive VR games aren't allowed to have full body nudity to that level by government mandate. What the hell? Are all human game models actually naked inside clothes and no one noticed? Or... The emotion suppression drew the increasingly rambled and panicked noise back to a dark corner, allowing Momonga to consider the ramifications. No, I'll have to experiment later. No way the shitty devs hid an eroge inside the DDVR and no one noticed. Nua. Perorankino would have had a field day. 9 seconds. Momonga reached his final stage of considerations, that being, who were friends or enemies for the purposes of preemptive attacks, outside the obvious enemy who had speared him. That kneeling flasher gag BDSM girl with red hair doesn't look like an enemy, from her pose and state of body, the rest are just circling and looking? Maybe this is some sort of arena fight, or character selection screen. Let's hope for the former. Time stop ended. Momonga fell as the flame spear fizzled into nothingness, and he took a steadying step. Teleportation? As he expected, the blonde man before him disappeared instantly after True Death and Detect Life hit, and Momonga steeled himself to cast Teleport once the target would re-enter his sensing range. He teleported after getting hit, so he didn't die. Detect Life vanished as well, so either the blonde died somehow after teleporting, which is unlikely as True Death is only 9th level spell and takes hold instantly upon being applied without damage over time, or the spell was dispelled, which is likely, or the spell didn't hit him due to dodge, which is possible, or he had false data, life, active, which is almost certain. A cunning foe for sure. I can't let my guard down. Momonga almost cast Chain Dragon Lightning, a chain lightning spell, on the circle of observers as he heard a female voice echo from somewhere, almost as if it came from loudspeaker. King, Riser Phoenix, retired. Rias Gremory wins the rating game by checkmate. Huh? Issei, Hyun. Issei. The red-headed BDSM flasher seemed to lose consciousness as she flopped on her back. As soon as her back hit the ground, the circle of observers around Momonga teleported away and caused Momonga to curse under his breath. Damn it, what if all of them were players and I was summoned to ambush? That other guy could dispel, fool or resist, Detect Life, so I was foolish to not cast it at the others as well. It would have at least given me info whether if they are NPCs, or at least give me a hint. Not many players know to properly fudge the HP numbers with false data. Momonga cast Silent Magic, Detect Life, on the gagged redhead and noted as he figured that either she was really good at illusions or she was a NPC, as proper players would have at least 100 to 1,000 times the health she had. That, or she was a new player. Did I somehow teleport to a human player starting zone? That would be kinda scary. How many max-level humans would there be to guard low-level ones? 100? Right, he must have prepared this area thoroughly. The surrounding areas are most likely trapped or turned to minefields. I can't act hasty before I ascertain their specializations. Momonga felt a very real drop of sweat run down his neck as he was waiting for the blonde fire spear guy to return to Momonga's sensory range, or at least place some sort of aura spell on the area, throw a bomb, or launch a long-range attack, or unleash a super-tier spell. Using himself as a trap, or rather, as a bait, was a risky play, but he was low on options, outside attempting to use Perfect Unknowable, or such to hide himself. But if the enemy realized he had used Perfect Unknowable to erase his aura and presence from perception, the enemy could then take actions to counter it, and thus Momonga would lose the edge on what was basically a ability that granted free sneak attack on the enemy. Damn it, if he's retreated to a pocket dimension, he can negate the cast time of a super tier without using consumables, and just deposit himself after the cast is complete and release the spell. Damn shitty devs for that balance patch, and damn whining that super tiers make casters too vulnerable. At least they have to reorient the spell before they can unleash it. That gives me the opportunity to teleport away before whatever comes hits me. Momonga felt as his petulant annoyance went over the suppression limit and was pushed back. Damn it. Right, before that, I'll need to make sure. If this really is DDVR game, there's no way they would have touch sensory input for that. Momonga walked to the downed NPC/newbie, took a look at a part of her anatomy and reached out. Someone really pushed the slider to the maximum, huh? The soft, bouncy flesh under Momonga's hand felt very real, very warm, and Momonga was very sure that either some government censorship regulation middle management official was getting really high bribes to look the other way, which was unlikely considering the punishment for getting caught to both company and individual, or, are these real? Actually real? Momonga whispered, his mouth dry except for the taste of blood. Then, is this reality? Yes, those are my sister's breasts, and they are very much real. A thoroughly unamused and incredibly annoyed, borderline angry voice invaded Momonga's thoughts through his fleshy ears. I am surprised that you are still alive, Issei-kun, but you need to get to infirmary right now, unless you intend to die doing what you loved, at least based off what I heard from Rias. Momonga looked up from his discoveries to see that the battlefield school had changed into some sort of entrance hall, slightly reminiscent of Nazarik's ninth floor, albeit only in the high ceiling and wide hall's aspect, as the marbling, gilding and overall artistry required some work. Hold on, did something just teleport me? The enemy has targeted teleportation spells. This is not good. I need to figure out what are the requirements for activating it. Otherwise, that blonde guy will just teleport me back to a super tier spell splash zone after I teleport away. The words Momonga had just heard caused his thoughts to pause, and his eyes to turn to a new threat. A pair of glares sent at him by an unknown gray-haired maid and an unknown red-headed man caused Momonga to shudder against his will. Silent, non-damaging psychological attacks? But undead are immune to intimidation and, Before he realized it, the red-headed man was looming over Momonga and the gray-haired maid was tugging at the quivering red-headed boob monster beneath Momonga's hands. Release them, if you'd please, Issei-san. My sister needs medical attention and please forgive my assumption, but I doubt your specific brand of healing massage helps. Momonga felt the sweat dripping down his neck multiply by 100 as the red-headed man's words, while mild and almost subservient in content, were positively dripping in what Momonga could only call, "Some punk tried to grope my daughter so I broke his spine and tossed him from the roof." Energy, the name coming from that one night when the old guildmaster of Ainz old gown, Touch Me, and the new guildmaster of the same guild, Momonga, had a talk during a raid as Touch Me seemed to be very agitated. Suzuki Satoru had been quite surprised to find in the next day's news that an unidentified young man had apparently committed self-die by somehow managing to break his spine and throw himself off a skyscraper, in that order. He then noticed that a wall nearby had a large window, and saw his own reflection in it, namely, that his face was that of a complete stranger, who was covered in blood and whose skin looked extremely pale while his eyes were cloudy like those of a dead person. Momonga paused for a while as he considered few possible theories. 1. He was, quite possibly, Ice-Gaiden in a Roge, and had a fleshy body that looked like a complete stranger. 2. He was currently facing an angry big brother and or big sister while caught kneading said pair's little sister's bare breasts for an experiment. 3. This was also possibly reality. 4. No concrete data on enemy levels or capabilities yet. Assume instant super tier spells or perhaps higher tier spells any given moment. 5. There may or may not be cabals of human players abducting undead and or non-human players with remote forced teleportation and instantly killing them. While unsurprising, doing so in human newbie area seems odd. 6. Pararonsainu. Aya. The sound of an old man's cry of pain and loss echoed through the halls as Sirzex Lucifer approached the Phoenix family's raiding game recovery room, which was named so because of Beelzebub's insistence, instead of naming it more sensible Infirmary, after depositing Rias Gremory to Gremory family's recovery room, alongside her. Pawn. Sirzex couldn't stop his eyebrow from twitching in annoyance. However, he was quite certain that any attempt to strangle the young man who apparently wielded boosted gear would lead to him getting an ear lashing from his adorable but quite scary little sister. Still, the temptation was always there, and what are devils if not slaves to their temptations? Sirzex tried to put his thoughts to rest and forget the young man who was Sirzex's sister's pawn, whom he had caught fondling his sister's breasts, right after the raiding game ended but before either of them received medical help, and before Rias could regain consciousness, and failed. Grafia touched Sirzex's sleeve and the Mao breathed out. Indeed. I did hear Rias's warnings that Issei-kun was an interesting person, but I feel I didn't quite set my bar low enough if he can still manage to limbo under it with such little effort. Perhaps setting it on the floor would suffice? Grafia commented dryly, causing the edges of Sirzex's lips to lift ever so slightly. His wife's mild suggestions, even if made in jest, always brightened his day. If not, we can always dig a trench and bury it. Or him. I fear you would have to bury me with him, in case Rias found out. Sirzex jested back. Regardless, we should concentrate on the conversation ahead. The head of the Phoenix family seemed quite distressed from his message, and if that cry of pain was any indication, I feel we may need to fear the worst. Surzek shook his head as the pair stopped in front of the double doors, which would lead to the recovery room. A nurse stood before the doors and bowed to the pair. "We're here. Show us in." Graphius saw to the usual greetings and assurances expected of someone seeking entry to a place of healing of when the occupants could be in critical state and thus vulnerable. After the customary exchange of greetings and assurances was over, Phoenix family's nurse led the pair to where Riser Phoenix was supposed to be recovering from his sudden and unexpected loss in raiding game. Only, Riser Phoenix wasn't recovering. AHH. The pitiable cry of loss coming from Lord Phoenix tore at the hearts of the room's occupants, those being Lady and Lord Phoenix, their daughter Ravel and two sons Ruvel, and another son whose name Surzex couldn't quite remember, alongside Riser's entire peerage or rather, his ex-peerage. The daughter seemed to be still in shock, while the younger son, much like his mother and the family's eldest son, wept quietly. Surzex Lucifer Sama, Graphia Lucifuge. Lady Phoenix greeted the pair cordially, or as cordially one can when trying to keep one's focus and calm on not shattering and breaking like her husband. "I fear you may have caught us at an opportune time. Please. It's all right," I called for him. "Thank you for answering this foolish old man's plea, Surzex Sama." Lord Phoenix seemed to compose himself, his eyes still glued to the body lying on the recovery room's bed. "I'm certain that Surzex Sama has already realized, but my son, my baby boy is not regenerating. He's dead. He's dead." "How did this happen, Lord Phoenix?" Surzex asked, putting as much sympathy to his voice as possible. The reason it didn't come naturally was because, to put it bluntly, the now-dead man had openly declared that he wanted to turn Surzek's adorable little sister into a breeding sow. He congratulated himself for keeping his face as it was and not betraying his true feelings. "I do not know, he was dead when he arrived from the teleporter." Lord Phoenix's voice cracked. The wards overseeing the game must have malfunctioned to a great degree. Surzex sighed, swearing despair upon his old friend Ajuka Beelzebub as his invention. The rating game system had malfunctioned to an unprecedentedly serious degree and had dumped the entire mess upon Surzex's lap. First Issei-san, Rias's pawn, was mortally wounded during the game and he wasn't retired automatically. And it happened again with Riser-san in the same match. I shall see to it that the source of the malfunction is fixed, and the culprit is brought to justice. The chances of this being a freak accident are between 0 and none. To me. Lord Phoenix grunted. Whoever was behind this, whoever tried, killed my baby boy. Bring them to me. That too may be justice, Lord Phoenix, but sometimes justice should be brought to light and not to a torture chamber. Future lives. I care little, Surzex Sama. Yet I must bear the burden of Mao, and act not only in the interest of myself, but also in our race as a whole. If this incident repeats. Surzes breathed out with as much visible resignation as he could, while internally he was already calculating his next move on the mental chessboard. After all, he gained plenty of leverage from the Lord's rudeness towards the reigning Mao, even though both knew that the Lord could not be truly expected to control his emotions at times like these. Very well. Should I hear something, you'll be the first to know. Thank you, Surzex Sama. And at the same time I must apologize. It seems my boy will not take your sister's hand in marriage due to his demise. Lord Phoenix said. While his language was cruel. At times, please understand that for our family the battlefield is no place for pleasantries and courtship. A cruel jest that throws an opponent into an easily exploitable frenzy is a valid tactic. A threat made with cardboard swords is as valid as a threat with a steel blade should the enemy believe it. I'm certain he would have revealed his tender side to Rias, had their marriage come to pass. Surzex had to try really, really hard to keep himself from biting his cheek from the inside as he let the words flow out with as much fake conviction and sadness he could manage. Yet, this leaves Riser sans peerage without king. Have you perchance already selected your successor? Is that not too hasty question, Surzek-sama? Lady Phoenix interjected, her gaze locked to the body in the room. My son's ashes, flesh hasn't cooled yet, and we are already talking about who bears his burden. That may be, I apologize for my rashness. I was merely wondering. If you require my assistance, I would be delighted to have them as my wards until you find another king to take them, as I believe that your youngest doesn't qualify as a king just yet. Surzex nodded his head just so slightly it could theoretically constitute an apology. On a different note, I believe my presence here is detrimental at the moment a family should mourn in peace. In parting, however, may I request to see the doctor's reports once the cause of death is verified? Seeking who did this would be easier if I knew what they did. You may. Lord Phoenix said before Lady Phoenix could deny him. Albeit, I can tell you right now if you wish. Please leave us afterwards. I fear retelling it may affect our mental state even further. Furthermore, the information contains some details I'd rather not reach Beelzebub-sama's ears, of course. Surzex agreed somberly. Information that shouldn't reach Beelzebub? He didn't die from a wound. Lord Phoenix said with a voice that was barely past whisper. Nothing is wrong. All organs are as they should be. No wounds were observed. However, the only devil energy in his body comes from ambient radiation from within the underworld. He's empty. The pieces don't recognize him. A king piece, which was quite shocking as we didn't know he had acquired one, fell from his chest, and won't go back. And the king piece itself seems inert, like if it was just a regular chess piece. Phoenixes aren't supposed to die like that. Even if we are killed, we'll be reborn from the ashes of our old bodies. Our souls go in cycles, even though our memories grow anew with each death, our souls are eternal. Now, nothing of it remains. No fire rose from his body to burn him to ashes and be reborn. He just lies, like a corpse. Like a dead human. Riser, my boy has suffered his final death. This is worrying. Surzex blinked as Lord Phoenix indulged in his mysticism of Phoenix family's signature abilities, even though reality of them wasn't quite as mystic. Indeed, while Phoenix devils were capable of regenerating from even normally fatal injuries, they didn't actually reincarnate from ashes, albeit one could call it so when Phoenix devil was burned to death and regenerated from the ash, which in turn would allow them to take a different body shape or appearance. So Riser had somehow acquired a king piece. I may have to ask Issei what he saw. And protect him from Phoenix's wrath. No doubt they'll place the blame on him once they realize Issei was closest to him when Riser died, regardless of what I'll do or say. The insults that boy had leveled against Phoenix's heir before the altercation won't help his cause either. Perhaps I'll need to find a suitable decoy that the Phoenix family can chase until they calm down. I shall see what can be done. Saving Riser may be beyond our grasp, but vengeance is always in our grasp. The old lord gruffed out. Go in peace, Surzex-sama. Thank you. Surzex exited the recovery room, Graphia in close tow. Well then, let's hope Issei-san saw something. Surzex wondered aloud. This might get ugly. Graphia could only nod in agreement. Isseikun. Rias. Someone help her. Issei. No, stay with us. Hentai. Asia, quickly. Screams surrounded Momonga as soon as the red-headed man and gray-haired maid dropped him and the red-headed flasher girl to what looked like infirmary. I seriously need to figure out some kind of defense against forced teleportation. I wonder if dimensional lock would prevent that? It's a wide-area general teleportation blocker, so maybe, but it also stops me from escaping unless I use gate. He resisted the instinct to cast dragon lightning, as an incredibly noisy flock of girls seemed to bubble around him and the red-headed girl. Mostly because the girls seemed to bubble with worry and panic, rather than attempting to attack Momonga. He thus concluded that the group was either friendly, or at least a non-aggression pact with the red-headed girl and Momonga. Is this what young people look and act like these days? So noisy. Please lower your voices. Momonga said, or rather attempted to say, as his sentence was somewhat wobbly considering the amount of blood he spurted out with each word. Right, blood-flooded lungs. Speaking with life liquid might not be advisable. A girl who looked like a nun placed her hands on Momonga's chest while a woman clad in a shrine maiden's outfit grabbed the red-haired girl and placed her into an infirmary bed on the other side of the room. Before Momonga could ask what the nun was doing, a green glow seemed to enter Momonga's body, followed by a hiss of pain escaping the nun's lips. I can't heal him, Issei-kun, please, please. God, please. Momonga felt a minuscule, barely noticeable dip on his health bar as the word God was uttered, and he instantly returned to high alert combat mode. Right, these wounds on my body need to go. Silent magic, Stitch. Stick was a third-tier spell that allowed flesh-based undead to either attach new body parts to their bodies, or reattach lost body parts, or repair wounds. It was particularly useful for low-level necromancers that specialized in flesh-based undead like zombies, as it allowed them to make amalgamations from lower-tier undead, like attaching corpse vulture's wings to a skeleton warrior to make a flying undead. The resulting undead was around level 20 to 30, depending on what ingredients were used, but there were limitations on how high-level amalgamations it could create. In the past, Momonga had tried to stitch two reanimated flesh horrors captured from hell together, but unfortunately, the pair of level 60-something undead had just turned into a single level 20 creature of writhing mass of limbs and muscle. The spell didn't do much to restore skeletons either, outside allowing simple bone reattachment, and its health restoration wasn't much to talk about at higher levels either. But from what Momonga gathered, his current body was likely either alive, a puppet, or a zombie. Thus having cosmetically intact body was enough, having actually working organs wasn't a high priority. The wounds in his chest closed and the damage to his internal organs disappeared, leaving particularly nasty scars in their wake thanks to the spell's nature. The newly regrown flesh above his heart looked like if someone had torn at it with a rusty power drill, mangling flesh into an uneven spiral scar. Momonga felt the bones of his left arm click in place and the limb twisted back into place from its earlier limp and dislocated state, causing the nun in front of him to jump in fright. Issei? Why, you can regenerate? Issei? Momonga blinked as he answered instinctively. Issei, huh? So this body I'm in, controlling, occupying? It is called Issei? Issei-kun, is everything alright, Issei-kun? The nun seemed incredibly nervous, but didn't appear to be hostile. Thus, Momonga's first thought of comboing Dragon Lightning and Napalm to create an electrified flame storm in the room due to the attack he received on his health slowly seeped away. It practically disappeared as he realized that the nun had flinched in pain as well when the word God had left her lips, thus the attack on Momonga was likely not intentional. Right, what was that just now? Ah, so that is a taboo word. How quaint to make God a taboo. Momonga sighed internally as he thought about it and realized what had happened. Taboo words in Yggdrasil were usually expletives or other words deemed unsuitable for use by government mandate, which would cause between moderate and heavy damage to any player using them in the game system. A punishment from above, as the developers put it. Most of the banned words included things of historic and political nature, and the most severe punishments could result in the chat logs getting transmitted to a corporate subcontractor, which would then lead to a knock on the door outside the game. For God to be a taboo, I suppose that the people here take religion really seriously. I have to be careful about that. I'll have to interrogate her later and see what she knows. Momonga began formulating his plans and setting them in motion. For now, since I know nothing about this Issei character, perhaps it'd be best to feign ignorance or pretend amnesia. If these characters were close to this Issei character, they could tell us apart instantly. Otherwise, I can probably use that spear to the chest as an excuse. I'm assuming this faction I'm in custody of is opposed to the faction that attacked me and is aligned with Issei. However, I have no guarantees that they are not just like every other human faction in Yggdrasil, that being anti-heteromorph and anti-undead. I should keep my true nature hidden as long as I can. Assuming this world works even slightly similar to Yggdrasil. Excuse me, but could I know your name, miss? Momonga asked the nun, taking in the scenery around them and figuring that using polite, if outdated patterns of speech would be appropriate. Since the humans around him weren't instantly hostile, or at least weren't hostile yet, he should probably be courteous at least until the situation deteriorated, or until he got his bearings and figured out the W's of what, where, why, who. I seem to have forgotten some things. I fear my injuries might have scrambled my memories somewhat. Huh? The nun stared at Issei in blank shock. Issei-kun. I am Asia. Don't you recognize me? I'm afraid not, my lady, may I? Momonga shook his head but had to cancel another instinctive counterattack as the nun dived in and hugged his waist in blind desperation. I'll need to lower my readiness level a bit. While it's possible to question a corpse, I think making enemies in the middle of nowhere by counterattacking against something like a hug would seriously mess my faction relationships. The nun sobbing into Momonga's torn and ruined clothes seemed to garner the attention of the room's other occupants. He went quickly over each of them. A shrine maiden, possibly a disguised succubus based off of body type, possibly a caster or a mage, a catgirl, approximately 10 or 12 years old, perhaps an assassin? A late teenage boy in school uniform wielding a katana, swordmaster, so if this nun is a healer, they have fairly balanced party just lacking a tank and a secondary healer, who must be. Momonga's quick categorization was interrupted as the white-haired girl sent him a quiet but deadly glare. Ah, so, she is an assassin. Hentai. The white-haired girl whispered with disgusted tone, looking at Momonga and turning her eyes towards Asia. Get away from hentai Issei, Asia. He'll feel you up. Momonga's eyes widened as the words clicked together and he glanced at the nun who looked like she was barely past childhood. Wait, if I'm Issei. Don't tell me this Issei was a pedophile who attacked underage children? He thanked the emotion suppression for activating and taking care of the rising bubble of varying emotions, mostly centered around Momonga's now shattered hope of making good first impressions. Or second first impressions as it were, and then suppressed the emotions again as he contemplated another, dreadful possibility. Ah, Asia-sama. May I inquire? Momonga felt the nun freeze, causing hold around his waist to tighten as he tried to carefully word the sentence. Were we perhaps in a relationship before I was stabbed? Asia seemed to blush deep and buried her head in Momonga's chest. I. The horrifying moment came to an end as the white-haired catgirl pulled the nun off Momonga, much to his relief. Hentai, stop trying to seduce Asia. Pervert. Pedo. Die and fall into a river. The white-haired girl intoned in an emotionless voice, causing Momonga to die a little inside. The girl then turned towards the nun. Asia, Rias needs healing. Doctor healed her, but twilight healing could help reduce the pain and make her recovery faster. Alright, Kaneko-san. The nun, still blushing, was dragged to the red-headed girl's bed while an elderly-looking man in a doctor's outfit left said bedside and walked towards Issei. Ah, Issei Hayudu-sama. My apologies for not seeing you sooner. I believed that Asia-sama was needed to heal your wounds, since your wounds were far more severe than Rias Gremry-sama's. And to be fair, Asia-sama's sacred gear would have been much better at healing you than anything I could have done. The doctor bowed to Momonga, causing him to bow in turn as having an elder doctor bow to him made Suzuki Satoru more than a little uncomfortable. Ah, please don't move too much, Hayudu-sama. Your wounds have barely healed. And it seems Asia-sama's healing wasn't quite enough to prevent scarring. My apologies. The doctor bowed again, causing even more intense discomfort for Momonga. Please, it's perfectly alright. Scars are but a mark of life lived. If fault must be placed, let it be placed upon our enemies. Momonga decreed, causing the eyebrows of the girls in the room to practically hit their hairlines. Hentai is weird. Momonga turned his eyes on the girl Asia had called Kaneko. The girl had scrunched her nose in a way that was somewhere between confusion and disgust. It made her look cute in a way a kitten would look cute if caught staring at a cockroach. Hayudu-sama. May I ask how you are feeling? The doctor interjected. Are you feeling lightheaded, confused? Confused, doctor. Momonga nodded severely, clasping his hands together as he saw a chance to strike the iron. I have no recollection of events leading to me being stabbed with what appeared to be a spear made of fire. I hope someone could explain to me what happened for such an event to come to pass. Ah, amnesia then? The doctor tilted his head. Were you struck in the head during the fight, Hayadu-sama? I am unsure. Momonga sighed. As I have said, I have little recollection of the events. I see. The doctor looked into Momonga's host's eyes. True, your pupils are somewhat dilapidated. Paling skin, symptoms of shock and likely blood loss. Faint heartbeat? The doctor placed an instrument on Momonga's chest, causing the overlord within to panic before he used another, silent magic, stitch, to restart his host's heart, which he realized had long stopped beating. Cosmetic features like beating heart weren't needed for the undead, so his first cast had likely ignored it. Ah, there it is. Irregular heart rhythm. Cold skin. I must ask you to lie down and rest, Hayudu-sama. You have lost a lot of blood as well, but Asia-sama's healing should have restored most of it. My staff shall observe your recovery as well as your king's, and with hope your memories will return post-haste after enough rest. Your amnesia might be short-term only, but I'll inform your king once Gremmer-sama wakes should preparations for long-term amnesia be necessary. Very well, thank you for your hard work. Please confirm my deepest apologies and deeper thanks to my king should I not be conscious or able at the time. Momonga nodded resolutely while he breathed out in relief inside his head and turned his host's body so it lay on the bed. My king? I have no king, and I have no nation but Ainz Gaon. Ah, Issei's king. I hope I don't have to pretend to be subservient to some dusty old snake. Well, phase 1 of operation use random excuses to make my way out is a go. If Momonga had caught the looks of pure shock on the faces of the girls on the other side of the room, he might not have felt so victorious. Lady Rias, she's awake, hurry up, Anne. Momonga kept his eyes closed as he lied still, pretending to be asleep as the other side of the room burst in activity. Oh? The flasher girl is awake. It's been 6 hours? Keeping track of time while pretending to sleep wasn't easy, and Momonga didn't trust his luck enough to sneak in glances to a wall where the infirmary's clock hung. If someone saw him awake, they'd start questioning him again about his mental state, and he still needed some time to ponder on the whole affair of him being where he is, what he is, and so on and so forth. At some point someone had changed Momonga's clothes from the battle-worn and smoke-smelling uniform to a hospital gown. Fortunately it appeared that his caretakers/jailers seemed to be content with letting his twitches and turns count as just bad nightmares, and not Momonga's emotion suppression activating again and again as Suzuki Satoru came to terms with the fact that his situation was most likely the following. 1. He was undead occupying a human body in what was equivalent to human player's starting zone. 2. The body he was occupying was likely a direct vassal of the faction's king, based off the doctor's words from before. Possibly a royalty or a noble. 3. The moment anyone realized the host was dead, or at least that's the conclusion Momonga had come to, the faction would likely seek his demise. 4. The world he was in likely had multitudes of powerful beings who had the ability to teleport others at will and were capable of creating elaborate and long-term traps, not to mention likely had arrays of other game-breaking abilities he hadn't seen. 5. And most importantly of all of it was likely real, as Momonga had attempted to log out quietly multiple times while he slept, to no avail. And the boobs he had fondled had definitely been real, so with the two facts he could fairly reliably agree that reality around him was indeed real. 6. It was real for Yggdrasil logic as well. He wasn't entered into the host body as Suzuki Satoru, a average salaryman, at least as far as he was aware, but as Momonga, his in-game avatar, and thus had access to spells and abilities associated with Momonga. He concluded that not only were skills and abilities from Yggdrasil applicable, but also bosses, enemies, and items who would likely also exist in this world. So, let's hear who the redhead is. If she was with me during that fight, she's got to be someone from Issei's side. Perhaps a royal escort or something, based on her lack of clothing back then? Momonga's ears picked up more steps from the outside and heard as the doors to the infirmary opened, accompanied by a pair of footsteps. HM? The doctor and the nurse stayed to look over the redhead. So, who are these? Ah, Lucifer-sama. Momonga froze. Luke Lucifer? As in that Lucifer? The one from that raid that broke entire raiding guilds, and who Ainz' old gown managed to clear only because at the time we had the rare metal mine and could manipulate market enough to get practically unlimited health potions and buff items, and even then it took the whole guild and all our non-single-use world items to beat? Momonga resisted the urge to freeze as the very real monster outside his bed walked past it. If he's here, then we're in hell, the Christian mythos's afterlife for sinners, which likely means there's a living realm and the realm of God. Ow, even thoughts cause damage? Alright, that makes sense and also explains why the name is taboo, don't speak the Lord's. Ow, name in vain, and so on. While Momonga was having a panic attack on the inside, the pair of footsteps reached the area where the red-headed girl was currently waking up, at least if her groggy voice was anything to go by. Then Momonga heard something coming from the girl that caused his newly reanimated heart to stop. Literally. Big brother. Oh no, that'd mean she's Gabriel, perhaps? Lucifer was the first angel to fall from heaven and was punished to be the lord of hell, so his sisters would be angels, which means in this world both Gabriel and Lucifer fell from heaven and were punished. Momonga thanked his emotional suppression once again to keep himself at least in moderate mental stability as he realized what he had been doing to the red-headed girl when he had been forcibly teleported away from the battlefield. I fondled Gabriel's boobs in front of Lucifer in hell. At least this means I'm not in a human player's starting zone, but am I in heaven, or hell? Where does this fit in the Christian timeline? Before Genesis, or something? Although, it's not like I know much about that, all I know about that mythos is from Yggdrasil's raids. Voices of conversation flew over Momonga's head as he struggled to not break down and panic despite his emotion suppression. He remembered to recast Silent Magic, Stitch, again on his heart this time though, before anyone could react to the beeps of his heart rate monitor coming to a stop. I'm so dead. The thought was further fortified in his head as an object hit his bed, causing it to almost topple over. Isseikun. Realizing that fighting his way out was a definite no-go with literally the ruler of hell within the room, and knowing there was Snowball's chance in the very literal hell he could bullshit his way out with the Lucifer, the Lord of Lies himself, Momonga fell back on his tertiary tactic, ignoring his problems and hoping they eventually go away. A soft body seemed to flop over him for a moment before it froze for a bit and withdrew slowly, making Momonga realize that the owner of the body was the red-headed girl. Now I can tell people apart based on the softness of their breasts. Great. This has to be an eroge. 1. Careful there, Rias. Your body is still in need of rest. Riser Phoenix's attacks, from what I saw in the observatory, targeted your joints so you won't be able to pull high-speed movements until you've rested enough for them to heal completely. The same soft voice Momonga had heard in the corridor after getting teleported rang in the room. From what I've gathered, you'll be fine with just rest now, Rias. Oh, and the marriage is also cancelled. I have confirmation of it from Lord Phoenix himself. Might I inquire about Issei-san's condition? Go ahead and tell us, please. The red-headed woman's, Rias's, voice was shaky. Rias? I don't remember her as part of Christian mythology. Is the Bible, oh wow, different here? Momonga thought as he focused more on the speech, while making sure his body appeared to be sleeping. It appears that Hayudu-sama has suffered and recovered from a heart attack. His heart rate flatlined and returned shortly afterwards on its own. A remarkable display of self-healing. The voice of the elderly doctor invaded Momonga's ears. But I am missing the subject, my apologies Surzek-sama. Not at all, please go ahead. It appears that Hayudu-sama suffers from extensive amnesia. I've not had the pleasure of meeting him before he was assigned to my care, so I cannot tell if his personality has changed from my own perspective, but his fellow peerage tells me that his behavior has been quite unusual and even disturbing. Non-violent, of course, the doctor coughed and continued. I personally didn't recognize any disturbing patterns in him. He seemed like a reasonable and polite person, perhaps even regal. If I had read that he was the heir of a noble family of devils, I would have believed it without a doubt. In fact, I had to recheck the paper when I read that he was a mere human in an ordinary family before his resurrection into Gremry peerage. I believe that's the disturbing part, a dry female voice interjected whom Momonga attributed to the maid he had seen in Lucifer's presence before, and assumed to be with him now. Grayfiane. Please continue, the soft, velvety male voice urged with a twinge of humor. Regardless, I've had a report that he possessed sacred gear, called boosted gear, however I was unable to find it in his body or his possession. Furthermore, the pawn piece in his body has become worrying. I am not at all versed on the subject of peerage system nor pawns, at least when it comes to the mechanical and mythical parts of pieces themselves, but I feel as if it had mutated far beyond what a piece should be able to mutate. I'll forward your findings to Beelzebub. He designed the system, so he should be able to tell what's wrong with him. Lucifer's voice caused the hairs on Momonga's host body's neck to stand on end. Beelzebub too? That's two top-tier raid bosses in the same dungeon. Momonga was starting to feel sympathy to a group of 5 level 20-ish newbie elf players who had invaded Great Tomb of Nazarick in the past when the guild had been out together, only to return to base when the elves had entered the first floor of the dungeon/base. In the end, the elves had to fight against 41 level 100 players with world-tier items at the same time. And considering that Ainz's old gown at the time had thought that the elves were just a distraction or rearguard of a larger invasion, they all had gone all out. Hold on, what was that? Sacred cog or something? Issei doesn't have his sacred gear anymore? Rias's voice was shaky. He was hurt so badly, and he sacrificed his body and his gear, and even his memories, to save me from Riser? It appears to be so. The doctor agreed, at least as far as we know of his injuries. The soft weight settled on Issei's stomach and Momonga realized that the red-headed girl was crying on his hospital gown's stomach part. Well, this is awkward. We'll have to evaluate if he can stay in your peerage still. Lucifer's sound broke the gloom that had been filled with sobs until his interruption. No. The girl's voice was resolute. I won't just toss him away like a spent battery. I'll find a way to restore his memories. Bring back his sacred gear. Make him whole again. He did this for me, it's the least I can do for him. Of course, Rias, but please consider that boosted gear has likely moved to reincarnate in someone else. With that in mind, the Welsh dragon, Draig, within the gear would likely know what happened, so seeking out the new owner might be in our best interests anyway. Momonga could tell Lucifer's tone was calculated to the extreme in order to not upset the red-headed girl. With that in mind, it might be wise to consider Issei-san's current strength as well. Going against boosted gear might be dangerous. If Issei-san's strength has returned to level of a low-ranked devil or is perhaps even weaker due to losing his lost memories, broken body and lost gear, he might not survive the conflict, as I'm assuming the new owner of the gear might be opposed to having it torn from him. Be broken body? The words came with a sniff, originating from around Issei's midsection. Lucifer-sama would be referring to the state of Hayudu-sama's body. He is currently suffering from multiple organ failures and myriad of other altercations, and I'm honestly baffled how he is still alive. Even his heart seems unstable as it beats irregularly, and it even stopped just a moment ago before restarting. The doctor's voice came again. At this point all I can say is that either there is some unknown force at play, or his piece has mutated somehow into a pseudo-regenerator and is pretty much the only thing keeping him alive, if barely. The fact he hasn't woken up during our conversation and during Ryu-sama's physical interaction suggests that he may have fallen into abnormally deep slumber or perhaps even into a light coma. Momonga resisted the urge to freeze up as he heard the doctor's speech, cursing his foolishness. A undead like him didn't really need organs, so he hadn't kept casting stitch on all his damaged organs to reanimate them in addition to repairing them, which in retrospect was foolish as he was in a hospital, a place where patients' health would be constantly monitored. The fact the doctor had checked his heart rate earlier should have been enough warning for him, and he cursed his carelessness again. I'm literally in the same room as Lucifer. Overlooking details like that will get me killed. Although even then, the state in which Stitch would leave his organs could only be called horrifying rather than healthy, mainly due to the spell's necromantic nature. It turns out that pretending to be a living being while undead is harder than I thought. Breath was forced out of his lungs, alongside some residual blood still within them, as presumably Rias hugged his body hard enough to compress his chest. It seemed that the blood now on his lips didn't sneak past the girl's notice. And no. Please, Momonga sighed internally. This is going to be a long night. As the dawn came, Rias Gremory looked like she had spent the whole night crying, which she had. Rias, are you quite all right? Aquino asked seriously as she placed her hands on the king's hands. You look awful. I thought you'd be glad that the marriage contract with Riser is now history. Also, where's Issei? We haven't heard from him since he came from the game with you, spouted bunch of nonsense, and flopped over on the bed. Rias took a choked breath in and breathed out equally shakily. The breakfast laid before her seemed thoroughly unappealing, despite being made of the best ingredients found in the underworld and made by the best chefs employed by the Gremory family. The rest of her peerage didn't seem to share the opinion, as they were gorging themselves on it, with varying degrees of class or vulgarity. The breakfast was held in a hall-like room that had a table spanning its entire length, with enough seats to fit 100 people. One side of the long walls showed a spectacular view of the underworld scenery outside, and another wall held a fireplace of grand proportions, in which danced a warm yellow flame. Depending on the meeting or circumstance, the flame would change between colors to create an appropriate mood. At the moment only 4 people were sitting around it and eating though, and 2 maids were standing by near the entrance to assist should any of the diners need something. Rias's appearance wasn't missed by anyone in the room, but seeing that Aquino had charged straight into the issue, they likely felt that they couldn't do much to improve the situation outside listening while eating. Thus, breakfast. And in truth, seeing the rest of her peerage happily eat away cheered Rias up slightly. If only Issei was here with us. There's been a issue with Issei. As I imagine you've realized. Rias shook her head as Aquino looked like she'd ask again. Well. Aquino's hands tightened on Rias's. He has a long-term amnesia from Riser's final attack, which means he can't even recognize us anymore, and he's lost his sacred gear, and his body is on the verge of breaking down. My piece is the only thing keeping him alive anymore. His heart stopped 4 times this night alone, and his lungs must have ruptured at least 5 times, because when I hugged him there was blood everywhere and his spleen exploded and regenerated at one point. Rias burst out in quick succession, instantly causing the munching around the breakfast table to come to a crashing end. Literally as Asia dropped her plate on the floor. The vice grip Aquino applied on her hands caused Rias to pause, and then Vince as Aquino shook her hand. Thanks, I needed that. It's nothing. Aquino sighed. Issei's condition is that bad. It's all because of me. I should have just forfeited at the start. I knew we wouldn't win. I placed all of you in danger and Issei. Rias's starting panic was quelled as the rest of the peerage piled on top of her, causing the chair she was sitting on to wobble and then fall on its back with all its occupants. No. Kaniko's speech was short and to the point, as was usual for the girl. She's right. We came of our own choice. After all, we knew the risks when we became your peerage. Except for Issei-kun, I guess. Yuto commented while patting Rias's shoulder. Anyway, Issei-kun knew the risks that would come from opposing Riser Phoenix so fiercely. My only shame as a man is that I couldn't sacrifice my body, mind, and soul to earn you victory like Issei did. His love for you is truly one of a kind. Pete, please, never speak like that again. I don't want anyone else to. Rias's breath hitched and Akino looked at the boy with a glare that said, "Shut up now or else." Akino offered Rias the sleeve of her shrine matron's outfit, and before a rational thought entered Rias's head, she blew her freely running nose on it. The raven-haired shrine maiden was initially completely stunned by the action, but the shock turned to tease in a heartbeat. "Oh, I intended for my king to rest her head upon mine arms. But if I am to become a rag for thine juices, I shall do my best to drain you and sate your needs, until my now fluid-covered body fails me or the flow of your passion runs dry." Rias's face turned as red as her hair. Akinu. "No. As much as it pains me to interrupt such a heartfelt confession, even mouths must eat. May I intrude myself to my sisters and her peerage's breakfast?" A soft voice caused Akino's face to turn as red as Rias's, evening the scores as far as embarrassing each other was concerned. Brother, Graphiane. Rias turned to look at the reigning Mao, Surzex Lucifer, who was looking down at Rias with Graphia in tow behind him as the pair entered the dining room. How is he? Stable. Well, considering. It seemed almost as if his body's deterioration was hastened by our presence alone. I wonder if I have an unknown aura or some such that interferes with Issei-san? Last I checked, all my auras were under control. Surzex didn't seem at all affected by fatigue after spending the night alongside Rias, while the red-headed girl was trying her best to cry all over Issei and succeeding. Nor did Graphia look any worse for wear despite standing in attention beside Surzex for the whole time. Now, it might be advisable to get some food into our respective systems before we go through some information that has been recently released and see about our actions today and in the future. That sounds pretty ominous. Rias muttered as she shooed her peerage back to their seats while Surzex sat on the end seat of the table and Rias sat on the opposite end. The rest of the breakfast was a fairly somber affair and it seemed that Rias couldn't force much more than a few morsels down her throat. Excellent. Now that we've had our fill, or at least attempted to do so. Surzex seemed to sigh at Rias before continuing. May I request that the service staff leaves the room? The two maids by the door side bowed elegantly and exited without sound, which was then followed by Surzex waving his hand and a red pentagon enveloped the devils present. A isolation spell? Rias asked while the others reacted to the spell with degrees of wonder or apprehension. Noise isolation, right? We need some privacy, and like in all places, the underworld too has walls that listen and doors that talk. Surzex explained while nodding at his sister and her peerage. Now, I'll begin by listing a few facts. First, Riser Phoenix is dead. Permanently and without rebirth. He died instantly after he stabbed Issei-san, completely ignoring Phoenix regeneration and rebirth from ashes. Rias let a choking sound, which was pretty much followed by her peerage doing the same. Second, from what I've observed, Issei Hyudu has learned to regenerate. But can only regenerate in a way that causes horrible scarring to the point it is outright detrimental to the user. Literally, his self-healing causes more damage to his body than the damage his body had sustained in the first place. Gah. Rias's attempt to clear her throat failed spectacularly as the 1-2 fact combo came too rapidly. Thirdly, the Phoenix family has issued a blood feud against whoever killed their son or helped someone in the attempt. Considering Issei has somehow learned a ability that can be only learned by being part of the Phoenix family, I have a feeling someone might jump to conclusions since Issei was, well, connected to Riser during the moment of his death. Or their death, as Issei's condition is still quite critical. Arias, breathe in. Aquino was struggling valiantly as she hacked Rias's back while she herself looked like someone had tripped her over thrice in the span of a minute. Why you did that on purpose? Rias pointed an accusing finger at Surzex. Wait, he's... Fourthly, I asked Dajuka Beelzebub to analyze the piece within Issei Hayudu. He entered the room after you left. Rias felt her blood freeze. Excuse me, I need to return to Issei's side. Don't worry, I told him no live or dead vivisections and or autopsies, and don't try to twist my words like saying you didn't tell me not to perform non-consensual organ harvesting or since he's in limbo, between life and death and thus neither, I can just open him like can of beans search his side while waving his hand theatrically. He's pretty much the only one who can make sense of what is happening to Issei-san, for better and hopefully not for worse, so he's definitely our best bet on allowing him to make a full recovery. Or at least a recovery. Okay, return him to a state where he won't spontaneously die from multiple organ failures and simultaneous heart attack. Asia's head fell on the table with a thunk, followed by the now unconscious nun devil flopping down from her chair and under the table. Rias felt like screaming and clawing at her eyes, while also wanting to cry for Issei's sake and strangling her dear brother and running full speed towards Infirmary. It was somewhat fascinating how one could feel so many conflicting emotions at the same time. Well, he is a Mao, one that specializes in wordplay, so... Rias sighed as she forcibly calmed herself and placed her hands on the table, causing the redwood to crack. Brother dearest. Oh. Surzex's eyes widened and he got up instantly. Would you look at the time, I have some Mao business to take care of. Grafia dear, would you? The ruling Satan of Underworld was pushed back to the chair with a firm grip coming from the maid beside him. Dear, I believe Rias-sama has some high importance and high impact words to deliver to you. Traitor. Momonga would have screamed if he could have afforded to do so. First, the red-headed girl had spent the whole night alternating crying on him and then hugging him. Normally he'd have no issues with the latter, but she was using so much strength he could feel his barely stitch at organs rupturing as she did so, that then caused her to hug even tighter and cry all over him, and he healed himself before either Rias or the literal raid-wiping king of hell beside her could call for the doctor, and she returns to crying, and round it goes. When his tormentors finally left he thought he could afford to crack open an eyelid and take a look around, but he overheard Lucifer talk to Beelzebub in the presumed hallway outside Infirmary, telling the great fly something about vivisections and non-consensual organ ownership alterations. What Momonga assumed to be Beelzebub then entered the room carrying an ominous item that let out chimes of metallic instruments hitting each other, combined with a good-natured hum. So that one must be Hayudu-san. Yes. A click rang in the room, making Momonga think about handheld recorders sometimes used by doctors in old movies to record their procedures. Subject unconscious at the start of the procedure. Irregular heartbeat varying from 6 to 80. Heavy scarring visible, piece clearly unstable. Let me just get the extractor and analyzers. Right, to hell with it. Momonga decided as he cast teleportation, intending to land somewhere without humans. Making a blind teleport was always a risk as one could land inside a wall or under earth, and if one couldn't expel the new matter from their body they would either spontaneously explode in a shower of gore and organs or just fuse with whatever they had teleported into. However, considering the person present in the infirmary room, the former seemed to be the case even if he didn't teleport, so Momonga decided to take his chances. Momonga teleported into what seemed to be a bath. In closer look, the bath was currently occupied by a group of girls. Momonga's blood froze over as the girls looked at him in pure shock, and he looked back with equal shock as he recognized the well-endowed woman among the group to be one of the girls making the arena circle of observers in his fight against the blonde fire staff-wielding man, and then recognized that the whole group of girls to be the same ones who had made the ring in the first place. Once again, he thanked whatever phenomenon that had gifted him the ability to suppress emotions, or he would have otherwise collapsed into a panicked heap on the spot. Oh. Greater teleportation. Hell-bent on staying alive, or at least as alive as undead can be, Momonga teleported away while preparing mentally to be yanked back by whatever forced teleportation spell the Undead Hunting Girl Guild had used before. He hoped that greater teleportation would be enough to resist the counter-teleportation, since it could not only travel in 3 dimensions but also interdimensionally. Momonga found himself in nowhere. Literally. It was akin to a void of nothingness, an illogical antimatter of existence itself. He could feel that even being in where he was, or rather wasn't, was draining his mana and health at a steady pace. And what is this then? WWHHOOO, a roar caused Momonga to discard his current line of thoughts, and he turned towards the source of not sound, and saw a demonic red dragon of gigantic proportions. A creature that could have only fit inside the realm of non-existing. Hello. Momonga bowed like a salaryman would bow to a CEO out of reflex due to the creature's oppressive, disappointed and explosive aura. His emotion suppression activating at least 12 times in less than a second was also quite impressive, at least in his opinion. Who might you be? 3 am the worldy Atir, greet read. Heed Aandde. You who hold the aurora of death. The dragon's voice seemed to be distorted by power and time as it flung its wings open, the wingspan something that could encompass the entire world. Nope. Momonga decided that running was better part of valor, once again, and decided to see if he could screw up again by rolling a natural 1 on metaphysical d20 of teleportation for the 3rd time in a row. Perhaps he would land in the heart of a dying star? Greater teleportation. His chances deposited the body snatcher overlord into a long hallway-like room with a long table, where the red-headed girl who had spent the better part of the night crying over Momonga was seemingly beating the tar out of Satan himself using what looked like half of a grilled trout. The room seemed to freeze over as the room's occupants turned to look at Momonga, who was clad in only his burning hospital gown. Burning hospital gown? Monona looked down and saw that he had teleported into a lit fireplace. Good, body of effulgent ruby, hasn't expired yet and these flames are probably low level so they shouldn't deal damage. Yeah, escape is definitely out of the picture, as Momonga stepped calmly out of the flame and sat down into one of the chairs flanking the table. In fear of sounding like a beggar coming to knock upon King's Gate for morsel of bread, would I be too bold if I were to ask to partake in thine breakfast? The moment the words left Momonga's mouth the burning hospital gown decided to retire from life and fell from his body to smolder quietly on the floor as his emotion suppression was working overtime, with the boss handing out new projects each minute, and completely out of coffee. Oh, it was still on fire. I think I'm starting to go a little insane despite the emotional suppression. A small giggle escaping Momonga's lips didn't seem to help the shock the people in the room were in. Momonga found himself on his back again, with a now familiar soft and bouncy feeling across his chest. Miss Rias. He bit his tongue as he realized his slip-up and looked up at the other people in the room he was in, now that the red-headed Satan beater had flung her weapon of choice, a back half of a grilled trout, at the literal overlord of hell who was hit with the projectile trout center mass on his head, toppling him from his lordly chair. A nanosecond later the red-headed fish archer had launched herself at Momonga's chest, toppling both of them to the floor of what appeared to be a dining hall which was currently hosting a hefty breakfast. 2. Right, we haven't been formally introduced yet, so I can't just blurt out her name or I'd have to explain I was conscious the whole time she spent tormenting me last night. Momonga cursed himself again. Little mistakes add up quickly. 1. Issei? You remember me? Rias choked out as she lifted herself a bit from Issei's body. But the doctor, amnesia. I don't remember much, I merely looked at thine radiant beauty, and the name came to me. Momonga tried to cheese it, hoping that the overly dramatic words would camouflage the panic threatening to rise, despite emotional suppression working him over like a 200-pound massage therapist with a bad case of Monday. It seemed to be the wrong thing to do, however, as the girl slumped over his body, crying uncontrollably. There. 1. Momonga stroked Rias's back awkwardly while looking around the room for help, or rather for an escape route. Unfortunately, he knew that trying to escape with End Boss of Hell Raid himself in the room was little more than fool's errand, so he chose to instead place the body of Lucifer's sister between Momonga and the source of his imminent death. The racked sobs of the redhead came to an end eventually, and the girl froze for a bit as she probably realized how the scene looked like for the outsiders. Issei-kun, we should probably get up. Of course, my lady. I apologize for causing distress and making a scene. Momonga's mild words seemed to cause physical harm to the girl, based off of the violent flinch she displayed after hearing his words. Are pleasantries some kind of taboo here as well? This place is so complicated. Rias? Get away from hentai. He's naked. Flasher, a quiet voice seemed to echo in the room, and Momonga glanced at the white-haired catgirl who had spoken. The girl was practically hissing while blushing up to her eyebrows in what seemed like embarrassment. He's just pretending amnesia to flash everyone and fondle boobs. 1. Momonga felt heat creeping up his neck, both because he just realized he was still very much naked due to his hospital gown burning away, and because it seemed that this kind of behavior was usual for Issei. Just what kind of person was this Issei? He paused for a while as he realized that the white-haired girl's words did fit Momonga's current situation, as he had fondled Rias's boobs, and was, indeed, currently flashing everyone in the room, and before that had barged into a bath full of girls, albeit unwillingly. I have become the pervert I attempted to avoid becoming. Truly, this world is a cruel and unjust one. 6. Issei-san. I'm glad you've recovered enough to move, talk, and teleport through flame. I wonder though, what exactly happened just now? A calm, soft voice came from the other side of the room, forcing Momonga to gulp before glancing at Lucifer, who had returned to his seat and was being seen to by a gaggle of maids which had appeared from seemingly nowhere and were picking pieces of trout from Lucifer's bright red hair and eyebrows. On a related note, girls, please find appropriate clothes for Issei-san, as he has currently lost his temporary coverage and has suffered a wardrobe malfunction thanks to his method of transportation. Let's continue our conversation afterwards. 2. The temporary coverage having retreated to the opposite end of the table from Lucifer with a face as red as her hair. Before Momonga had truly realized it, the gaggle of maids descended upon him like a pack of wolves, dragging him out of the room. He detected hints of animosity from the girls, which gave him two possible theories to work with. 1. The maids were annoyed that they had been ordered to leave Lucifer's presence, or 2. The maids had a history with the Issei character. He considered the latter to be the likelier of the two, since all hints Momonga had received pointed that his host body had been a shameless pervert, and if Momonga's experience on perverts, that being perorancino, were anything to go by, then girls in French-made costumes ticked quite few boxes on perverts' target bingo. Momonga felt something die a little inside his soul as he remembered Perorancino had been one of the players partaking designing the NPCs of 9th floor of Nazarick, and the decision to make the floor staff with the likeness of maids made more and more sense, unfortunately. Make it stop, make it stop. Momonga stood still with his hands spread to a T-pose as the maids did their work, doing his best to avoid shivering or instinctively teleporting and or defending himself as one of the maids, a glasses-wearing maid that had striking similarity to one of the Great Tomb's Pleiades battle maids. Perorancinuo put a set of needles between her fingers and went at the outfit beginning to form around Issei with reckless abandon. For a moment Momonga thought he saw his death in the maid's eyes, but steeled his not exactly working hard and waited calmly as the pack did their work, until the group retreated from now-clad Momonga and returned with a mirror. Does this suit fit your tastes, Issei-sama? Somehow the maid with glasses managed to underlace the polite words with enough disgust to cause Momonga to shrivel up inside. He looked at the mirror nonetheless to find himself in a crisp brown-red suit reminiscent of the one worn by the blonde fire staff-using man he had fought before, with exception of having the dress shirt tucked neatly into the dress pants and suit closed to give air of restraint instead of arrogance. I wonder if this is just the local fashion? Momonga looked at his new host body for the first time through the mirror, running his hand through his brown hair and looking at his equally hazel brown eyes, which were now laced with what appeared to be cracks of red and backlit with a faint red glow reminiscent of the flare which had made his eyes in his skeletal body. Ah, the veins in the eye must have popped and partially flooded iris with blood. That's unfortunate. I'll have to see if I can modify it somewhat, since I'm guessing I don't really need working eyeballs to see. I dread what my eyes would look like if I used stitch on them though, so I may have to look for alternatives. He resisted the urge to rub his eyes as he found yet another problem with his human disguise. Issei's appearance seemed fairly ordinary otherwise, and the maids, despite their apparent disgust with the host body, had dressed him up with skill and dedication, so Momonga had no complaints. He bowed his head slightly towards the glasses-wearing maid. An excellent choice, and even better execution, thank you. I'll confer my heartfelt thanks to Lucifer Dono, truly, one couldn't wish for better service than what you have provided me. Could you lead me back to the dining room? I believe Lucifer Dono had something he wished to converse with me. The maid's glasses seemed to shatter in shock, but she recovered with remarkable speed and clacked her boots together, curtsied slightly, and led him back to the dining hall with a gaggle of seemingly shell-shocked maids in tow. Issei-san. Good timing, Beelzebub-san arrived just now as apparently you had disappeared on him. Momonga felt his emotion suppression activate again to prevent him from doing an instinctive 180-degree turn and run or teleport away as he stepped into the long room and was greeted with not one but two of the highest-tier raid bosses in Yggdrasil. The pair was sitting calmly at the end of the long dining table in the dining room, with Rias and the familiar flock of girls still sitting on the other end. The girls had resumed staring at Momonga's host body as soon as he stepped into the room. Oh. Is there something wrong with my suit? Realizing that it would look undignified if he went over the suit in front of the audience, Momonga pushed on with as much dignity and grace he could muster. Having role-played as an undead king of dark golden marble tomb helped his acting somewhat, even though Suzuki Satoru had zero knowledge on acting regal himself. I wonder. Am I Momonga, or am I Suzuki Satoru? A thought struck Momonga as he figured out the fact he had just done something Suzuki Satoru had no knowledge of, and what only character Momonga would know intrinsically. Who am I, really? 5. He resisted the urge to physically shake his head to clear his thoughts of irrelevant topics while more immediate threats loomed. Momonga took his seat beside the table, one of the maids having pulled the seat in question back to both indicate where his place in the table was and to ease him into it. A glance revealed that he was roughly in the middle of the table, with Rias taking the seat at the end of the table where the girls, and one katana-wielding blonde-haired boy, were. On the other end of the table were Lucifer, with Beelzebub taking the seat to his immediate left, and the gray-haired maid, surprisingly, taking the seat to his immediate right. Oh. The balance of power shifts, I guess. I think royalty like this puts a lot of weight on showing off without telling. Excellent. Now that we've all been seated, I would like to receive answers to my questions, Issei-san. Lucifer told Momonga with a tone that allowed no option to withhold answers. But firstly, reintroductions are in order as I believe you are currently suffering from amnesia of unknown severity. I am Surzex Lucifer, current Mao and de facto ruler of the underworld. Beside me is Graphia Lucifuge, my beautiful wife, and Ajuka Beelzebub, a Mao and current head of science in the entirety of Underworld, and creator of the evil peace system. 1. Lucifer coughed once before continuing while Beelzebub waved at Issei and Graphia nodded curtly. Now, to the questions. How are you feeling, Issei-san? Why and how did you leave the INF rating game recovery room? Lucifer's eyebrow twitched as Beelzebub elbowed the first demon in human form on the side. Also, what happened to your sacred gear, if you happen to remember what it is, and how did you teleport through flames just now? To answer questions in order, I'm feeling alright. All things considered, of course. Momonga pretended to think for a while, pretending being the keyword as he stumbled upon himself mentally in a desperate race to find answers that would be both truthful and wouldn't leave him as a charred pile of bones on the floor. Of course. Lucifer nodded slightly, urging him to continue while Rias seems to become quite agitated on the other end of the table. I left the infirmary as I felt, desire to be somewhere else. Momonga paused for a while as he contemplated telling about his destinations and travel method. I didn't land here immediately, as I seemed to have landed elsewhere initially due to unknown reasons, but finally I arrived here. Indeed, but how exactly did you do it? Beelzebub seemed like Christmas had come early for him as he had pulled a notepad from somewhere and was scribbling something on it. I believe teleportation through flame, regeneration and flame immunity are signature abilities of the Phoenix family, and as far as we're aware, you haven't had any contact with said family until yesterday and the day before. Ah, Phoenix family? As in, the eternally reincarnating bird of fire? Momonga blinked and was corrected. Phoenix, not quite the same I'm afraid. One is a mythical creature and one is a family line of devil nobility who inherited the Phoenix's abilities. Lucifer interrupted, nodding thoughtfully, before his expression turned unreadable and even cruel, mirrored by Beelzebub's expression turning much the same. Regardless, I believe the time for lies is over. Yeah, trying to bullshit Lucifer didn't work, as expected. Time for Plan D, explode everything and make run like a rabbit. Hoping these two have aggro reset range, Momonga froze, gulped and quickly went over his catalog of spells in his head, cross-referencing them and trying to figure out what he could use to momentarily distract the two raid bosses in the room so he could make a quick getaway. Indeed, if I didn't know that Riser Phoenix had died yesterday, we might have taken you up on your words, perhaps thought Lord Phoenix had a tryst in the world above. But the very fact Lord Riser had not resurrected after the battle and his body hadn't turned to ash tipped me off. Beelzebub told Momonga with casual ease, the words going over his head as he didn't really know what the demon meant with them. Excuse me, I didn't get that. Momonga's confusion didn't seem to deter the great fly as he continued. There's no known way where a phoenix would die like how he did, so the most likely case is that he is, in fact, still alive, but in a body other than his own while the real body is just waiting for the soul to return. Beelzebub nodded solemnly. I consulted a certain devil-affiliated dragon after Surzexcuan told me about the raiding game's aftermath, and he told me that Infinite Ouroboros dragon could, theoretically, create something that would allow one to transfer their soul into a temporary container. The second thing that seemed odd was how the Phoenix family hadn't incinerated Riser San's body after his death in an attempt to force reincarnation, leading me to believe that the whole family might be in on the act, or are in state of shock where they haven't even thought of burning the body. Normally I'd have believed the case to be the latter, but Issei's sudden influx of new abilities made me turn towards the former. So tell me, when did you come across Ophis? What did you sacrifice in your petty lust to torment my sister, and what do you have to gain by pretending to be Issei Hyudu, Riser Phoenix? Lucifer's tone turned flat and unamused as he leveled a stare at Issei. Or rather, would you care to elaborate why you transferred your soul into the dead body of Issei Hyudu, outside attempting to cause my sister as much pain as possible and gradually mutilating Issei's body beyond recognition with your phoenix regeneration out of spite? And the next second, a heartrending wail left the red-headed girl's mouth on the opposite side of the table from Lucifer himself. Momonga found himself staring at the very hostile eyes of Lucifer, knowing that he had only seconds to live and already mentally saw the pre-boss pull counter with his vote permanently ticket to a box that said not ready, don't pull, yet some dumb ranger barely capable of comprehending speech, let alone reading letters, had already loosed an arrow and disconnected. Oh no, silent magic, delay magic, create undead third, silent magic, delay magic, create undead fourth, silent magic, delay magic, undead army. Momonga rattled spells off as the Lord of Lies and Great Fly of Hell were staring at him with naked hostility, aiming the spells away from the room and with the summons and attack at will order, in an attempt to create enough chaos to flee in case he was forced to fight not only one but two raid bosses at the same time. The fact Yggdrasil's spells and abilities worked in the new world that he had found himself in, real as it might be, made him fairly certain that the presence of Yggdrasil abilities also meant that Yggdrasil's concepts and enemies were present in the new world as well, that is, raid bosses. And now, two of the strongest raid bosses of their expansion, Lucifer and Beelzebub, were staring at Momonga, both in their human forms and both with naked hostility in their eyes. He tuned out the pained wails of the red-headed girl seated on the other side of the dining hall, on the other which a confrontation of truly one-sided proportions was about to happen, and Momonga held no illusions that he'd be on the receiving end. I need distractions, more distractions. There was no way he could expand his whole mana reservoir before getting flattened into thin bone meal if he was charged by two bosses at the same time, so he rattled off silent, delayed spells to create undead in random places around his current location, as well as placing traps. Casting silent spells already doubled the mana cost of the spell, and that was then doubled further by having it be delayed as well. The mana drain meant that he couldn't afford to spam silent and delayed spells in a normal combat scenario. But he wasn't preparing to fight properly in the first place, instead aiming to throw a necromancer version of sand in someone's eyes and running for the hills. Well, Lord Riser? Lucifer's tone could have turned raging volcanoes into icebergs. Have you anything to say for yourself? I don't really know what you are saying, Lucifer Dono. I've never heard of this Riser person before. Momonga answered honestly. The panic he felt clear in his voice as the stress overwhelmed even his emotion suppression, which was likely having a mental breakdown of its own due to the amount of work it had been forced to do in the past few minutes alone. I woke up suddenly in a field, stabbed through the chest, and my attacker disappeared somewhere, and I wasn't sure if this was reality or not, so I thought to fondle Ryasama's breasts since it seemed like something that would make it clear if everything was real or not. Lucifer seemed to do a double-take from Momonga's words, while Rias let a somehow reassured and almost glad sob as she heard of Momonga's reality check. Are you saying, then, that you truly have no clue as to what you've done? Are you truly that unrepentant? El Lucifer Dono, I truly have no idea what you're saying. My memories of this place stretch only to yesterday, and if this is about me fondling Ryasama's breasts, I truly apologize. Momonga delayed for time as he kept casting silent spells, ignoring a chorus of angry hisses and snarls and a single hiccup from behind him where Rias and the girl group around her sat on their chairs, presumably supporting their friend who had been wailing non-stop since Lucifer's announcement of Momonga's real identity. You truly have no idea, then? Lucifer seemed to deflate, much to Momonga's surprise, before the Lord of Hell turned towards Great Fly, whose expression had turned calculating. I apologize for the accusation, Issei-san. Beelzebub, your theory is either incorrect, or Riser-san is better actor than I ever gave him credit for. I could not detect hesitation nor lie in his words. He's telling the truth, or at least what he believes is the truth. 1. Graphia snapped her fingers in front of Lucifer's face in a way that clearly displayed her annoyance. My lord, I believe Issei-san is not the only one you have to apologize to. Rias, I'm sorry, but I had to make sure. Surzak seemed to bite in his tongue, confusing Momonga to the point he almost stumbled on his incantation of silent and delayed, summon middle-tier undead, Elder Lich. That spell alone, when silent and delayed, took more mana than the summons he had performed so far combined. If Issei-san would have been Riser, there would have been a sign from his real personality due to the factors involved. I've had multiple dealings with Phoenix's heir due to Phoenix tears, which are quite valuable to my research, and knew Riser's history quite well also. Beelzebub continued where Lucifer left off. He would have never missed the chance to take the center stage and reveal himself. It would have fulfilled his goal if our theory had been correct, and for that I needed your reactions to be real. I'm truly sorry, but the circumstances were too suspicious for us to risk it. Lucifer nodded severely. If what I suspected had been correct, Riser's cruel plan would have destroyed your will and soul utterly once sprang, Rias. I had to do it in a controlled environment if that had been the case. Fortunately, it hadn't been. At least yet. The sobs seemed to subside and a shaky voice emerged from behind Momonga. Why you're saying Issei? Issei-san is, indeed, likely to be just Issei and not Riser, but I had to make sure. There were too many coincidences. There's still a small chance that Riser-san is indeed possessing Issei-san in one way or other, but judging from the recent actions and events I doubt Riser-san replaced Issei-san. Lucifer nodded to Beelzebub. Indeed, there's a high chance the two souls, Issei's and Riser's, amalgamated together into something new entirely, displaying pieces of personality from both yet not truly being either. I will have to research this further to receive any concrete results. Furthermore, due to the extent of the amalgamation, I doubt this exchange was initiated by Riser, but instead by Issei-san in a final act of desperation. Beelzebub paused to adjust his glasses, turning them ominously opaque while looking seriously at Momonga, who hadn't really understood anything that had come out of the great fly's mouth. This would also go further into explaining the instability of his body, as I doubt Issei-san's body is durable enough to handle a soul that is suddenly twice as big and many times more powerful than the soul inhabiting it thus far had been. His regeneration, for example, doesn't know when to stop, so it acts more like a reactionary cancer than a healing factor. We all know Lognius gears are capable of truly outstanding feats, to the point only their wielders truly know the true extent of their strength, so this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise since the ownership of the gear was sacrificed to make it happen. Beelzebub continued and bowed his head to the red-headed girl behind Momonga. I understand the rage both of you must feel for my theories and for my test. I shall gladly shoulder your disapproval, Issei-san, Ria-san. I didn't really understand anything Lucifer or Beelzebub said just now except that they spoke words, but are they implying they're not going to attack? Momonga stopped casting his silent spells just before going to the part where he'd materialize a number of bone traps around the room alongside explosives around Lucifer's chair as the situation seemed to paradoxically unravel around him instead of turning into a bonus raid boss stage where you face two raid bosses at once. Lucifer Dono, is everything truly alright? I'm honestly more confused now than I've ever been before. I'm not sure who this Riser person is, but his focus had been entirely on the Lord of Hell and he never stood a chance as the attack came from behind, in the form of a red-tipped soft missile impacting him square in the back and tossing him across the room. Isseikun. The spells he had been casting were unleashed at the same time as Momonga's concentration broke. The body of Riser Phoenix groaned. A group of maids screamed from the top of their lungs as a group of skeletons burst out of the walls, rusty spears, swords and maces in hand. A gardener swung his shovel with practiced ease as the ground of the underworld began to stir with hundreds of rotten hands breaking through the earth, the hit severing several hands, but didn't slow the building tide of the living dead. A 15-feet-tall dragonoid form sniffed the air of the raiding game arena, the physical one as the pocket dimension, or rather a doorway to the walled-off portion of the interdimensional gap, had been temporarily taken down after the disastrous Gremry vs. Phoenix game. The stench of death entered the human-shaped dragon's nostrils and the dragon turned towards a huge, nearly 9 feet tall and 4 feet wide, fully armored knight-like undead wielding a cursed-looking flamberge and a tower shield. The dragon's eyes narrowed as the undead let a howl and charged. Guh. Momonga groaned out as he struggled under the stress of realizing that he had almost pulled 2 raid bosses at the same time, being drained of a sizable chunk of mana thanks to the silent spells, and getting knocked over. Luckily, emotion suppression saved him once again and returned him to a state of normalcy. Ria-san? He heard a wet crunch and quickly cast another, silent magic, stitch, as he felt his host body's cosmetic lungs nearly burst as Rias hugged him with her full strength. It's alright, Issei-kun, as long as you're here. She sobbed slightly while still hugging Momonga's back, before she turned her attention elsewhere and caused a sudden wave of dread to spread in Momonga's chest, albeit it seemed that the dread wasn't directed at him. Nisan. The girl's voice caused Momonga to wonder if she was capable of inflicting frostburns with her voice alone, as it was packed full of ice-cold anger. He looked up and saw that Lucifer and Beelzebub were both held down in their seats, with Graphia having placed a hand on each of the raid boss's shoulders. The gray-haired woman's face had a well-practiced, emotionless look that didn't quite hide a vein pulsing on her forehead. Really, Issei, I only meant to ensure everything was all right. Lucifer struggled to breathe under Rias's glare, surprising Momonga. Did I mistake the balance of power here? Is she truly this powerful, that even Lucifer shakes in front of her rage? Although, granted, they are siblings so it shouldn't be surprising, Byukubu Kagama had similar playfights with Peroroncino. Momonga looked at the exchange about to take place with wonder and nostalgia in his eyes. However, the sibling fight didn't happen as a maid burst through the doors of the dining hall, bleeding from a stab to her arm and holding on to the wound for her dear life. Lucifer Dono. There are undead. Ah! The maid fell forward as a skeleton warrior followed the maid through the open door and ran through her with a spear from the behind, the rusty weapon piercing through her lower back and coming out of her stomach. Oh! Almost forgot. The summons. Momonga blinked as he looked at the undead stabbing the downed maid. 1. Almost immediately afterwards a huge ball of black flame incinerated the skeleton, blasting burning bones all over the hallway where it had come from. What is going on? A black-haired and well-endowed girl from Rias's end of the table asked in pure shock as she looked at the bleeding maid and the vaporized undead. Asia! Wake up! The girl reached under the table to pull out the unconscious nun Momonga recognized from the infirmary. Asia. How did she end up under there? He watched as the shrine maiden-looking girl slapped Asia gently a few times to wake her up. I'm awake. Asia blurted out. What's going on? Asia-chan, sorry for waking you up so suddenly, but please heal her. The raven-haired girl pulled the nun towards the maid. Screams echoed from the hallway outside the dining room, and before Momonga properly realized it, a shadow passed over him and Rias, who were still lying half-seated, half on the table with Momonga facing down the table and Rias lying on top of him. He glanced towards Lucifer's side of the table to see that the seats on that side of the table were now empty. Oh. Don't tell me I pulled the raid bosses after all. Momonga felt like adding his voice to the chorus of screams that had started to echo around the place. Report. What's happening? Surzex demanded from one of the guards holding back a horde of zombies. A flick of Lucifer's hand formed hundreds of small magic circles and sent a wave of arrows formed from power of destruction, obliterating the wave of undead with contemptuous ease. Thank you, Surzex-sama. The guard breathed out. All of a sudden a group of undead appeared from nowhere. We've been fighting for our lives here for a few minutes now. How did they get past our perimeters? Interesting. We might have a traitor amidst our ranks. Surzex pondered while he sighed aloud. Good work. Fall back for now and treat the wounded. The guard nodded gratefully and grabbed one of his wounded comrades, dragging them off. We are currently within Raiding Games grounds, an area that has been agreed to be off-limits for territorial aggression or inter-family squabbles. Agreement made by all of the pillars and families, outside of the Old Mao faction of families. Surzex pondered to Graphia as the pair ran towards the next fighting hotspot. Who'd be insane enough to arrange a full-blown attack here? They'd make enemies of all noble families of devils, since attacking Raiding Game grounds is tantamount to attacking the heirs of the families who come here to participate in the games. Someone who is either seeking to challenge the whole underworld, or is trying to distract us from something happening somewhere else. By now, the attention of everyone in the underworld would have converged here. Graphia mused as the pair crashed into a group of skeletons with force of a thunderstorm, scattering the pathetic force like leaves to wind without even breaking stride. Or perhaps they were not expecting two of the Maos to be present? The skeletons seemed to give the guards a good match. Given enough time, they could have been overwhelmed by the sheer number of the dead. That leaves the question, where did they get the bodies? A thundering crash came from nearby, followed by another one, and then a third and final one as a massive draconic form broke through the walls of a nearby building from the inside, slamming a slightly smaller form of an undead knight held in its grasp to the ground. A sickening crunch accompanied the man-shaped dragon, crushing the undead knight's sword arm with both of its tree trunk-like hands, followed by chaining a series of punches while the knight was pinned to the ground. The battered-looking undead knight underneath the dragon let a soul-chilling shriek before the relentless battery caused the creature to expire and disappear into dust. "Tannen-san," Surzex called. "Are you all right?" "I am unhurt." "A pathetic display like this is not worth even my flame," the dragon scoffed, dusting himself off. "Surzex, I'm assuming you know what's happening?" "I'm afraid I'm just as much in the dark, I believe." Surzex motioned for the now trio to continue running towards what he assumed to be the next fighting hotspot. An unknown group of undead attacked the raiding game grounds. "We've had multiple injured personnel and heavy collateral damage, but aren't yet certain of the number of deaths so far." "Amateurs. No centralized attack or clear battle plan if what you told me is correct." Tannen scoffed as Surzex went over the descriptions and tactics used by the undead, the group crashing through another melee while talking and moving forwards, pausing just to order the survivors to make their way to the others. "These may be just skirmish groups. The leaders must be still keeping themselves in reserve until they know how the initial push went." Surzex mused. "It makes no sense to send groups of undead all over the place otherwise. They are just testing us." Then let us show that they have no chance of victory." Tannen roared, the power of the roar shaking their surroundings. "Come at me, weak cowards." A blast of fire hit the dragon, cutting off the roar midway through and knocking the dragon off his feet. "Who uses fire against a dragon?" Tannen growled as he looked towards the direction where the fireball had come from. "Oh my." Grafia couldn't quite keep her shock from showing in her voice as she too saw the person in question. "Oh, I must confess, I did not see this coming." Surzex nodded, his voice carefully calculated to be both pleasantly surprised and mildly entertained as he took in the visage of the attacker, positioned on the roof of a specific devil family's reserved quarters within the raiding game grounds. "Nay, Riser Phoenix-san?" The pale but very much animated young man responded with a growly chuckle that would have caused lesser man's hairs to stand on ends, a testament to its unnatural properties that the sound could be heard from hundreds of feet away. A long yellow parchment seemed to float around the man as he lifted his arms forward, then flicked his fingers up while a magic circle formed in front of him. Another ball of fire careened towards the group of devils, forcing the trio to scatter as the area they had been standing on exploded. "We need to help them." Rias herded the group of girls, Momonga, and the katana-wielding boy into the hallways outside the dining hall after the initial shock of sudden undead attack wore off. "How did these things get here? What are they?" A skeleton warrior tried to run through the red-headed girl with a rusty sword but was blown apart as a small ball of black energy left her hands and impacted the skeleton. "Huh. That skeleton was around level 10-ish. I can't really judge strengths with that display alone." Momonga was using the distraction to gauge the approximate strengths of the people around him while he was flanked on all sides by the group, who were seemingly hell-bent on keeping any harm from coming to him. "I kinda wish I hadn't unleashed the spells, specifically with just general orders of creating havoc, but it's too late now to lap up the spilled milk. At least I'll get some useful data out of it." 2. He figured that he could technically order the undead to stop rampaging around, but he felt that the discussion afterwards with Lucifer might not go in his favor should anyone learn he had made the dead in the first place. Then again, I thought the guy would attack me at any second. "Oh well, I can use this." Suzuki Satoru felt a twinge of regret as Momonga stepped over a corpse of the maid with glasses who had made Momonga's suit, while the girls balked at the sight of massacre in the hall in front of them, bodies strewn all over the walls and floor, and in the middle of the corpses stood. "Oh, this might be good." The Death Knight in front of them let out a roar of challenge as it turned towards the group. Bloodied flamberge swung horizontally during the turn to clean it of blood and chunks of flesh. The massive tower shield it bore on its other hand impacted the ground with enough force to shake the floor and almost toppled over the nun who was standing behind Rias in shock. Asia screamed. The blonde swordsman lifted his katana to a fighting stance with calm of a seasoned fighter, surprising Momonga. The shrine maiden covered her mouth with her hand, her expression behind it warring between fright, determination and disgust. The catgirl let out a shaky breath, before lifting her hands up and placing herself to a wide stance in front of the group, almost as if she was a tank. She wasn't an assassin after all? Rias grunted and lifted her hand, a golf ball of black energy forming on it. Issei-kun. Stay back. We'll take care of this. Very well, Rias-sama. I'll try to avoid combat. Momonga bowed out as he moved to the back of the group, his eyes narrowing slightly as he relayed an order to the Death Knight. Well then. Let's see how strong Lucifer's sister is. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for next part.